A 200-year-old religious order founded by a venerated saint is closing forever. Plus, a Southern Baptist congregation gets kicked out of the denomination due to female pastors. What does this mean for the Catholic Church? That and more on That Black Catholic Chick. So here's the question of the day. What is the role of women in the church? What is the role of the women in the church today when it comes to Christianity? What is the role of women within the Catholic Church more specifically? We are under the impression that women are oppressed in the church, and you have so many women who are fighting against this, who are demanding that women are able to be priests, that they take on these leadership roles within the church, which have been prohibited and prevented from women and by women to be able to do this. Or not really by women, that's the wrong thing. It's been prevented for women to be able to participate in leadership roles in the faith. And that has a lot to do, or everything, not even a lot, it has everything to do with scripture, which we're going to get into in a moment. Today's stories that we're going to cover brings this question about the role of women in the faith front and center. And I want to challenge you to come up with options. If women can't be priests, what are other ways that women can shine? So we're going to lead in our first segment today with a recent story, which I feel, even though it's not about us as Catholics, I feel that it still is pertinent to this conversation. Recently, there was a congregation, a Southern Baptist congregation, that was ousted from the denomination because of its female pastors. Oh yeah, baby, it is getting hot in the seat out there. Now, there was an article that came up on CNN. I know, listen, just stay with me on this. It's actually a good article. An article that came out on CNN that covered this that I want to go ahead and dig into right now. Let's go ahead and read this article. Southern Baptist let's start that again. The Southern Baptist Convention votes to uphold removal of Saddleback Church over women pastors after appeal by Rick Warren. Now, this came out on June 15, 2023. The annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention voted to affirm a decision made earlier this year to remove Saddleback Church, a major Southern California congregation founded by the pastor and author Rick Warren, due to its having women pastors. Representatives at the conference in New Orleans overwhelmingly supported the decision to expel the church, according to the vote count reported Wednesday morning, despite pleas a day earlier by Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Life. The representatives, known as messengers, also voted to affirm the ousters of two other churches, including Fern Creek in Louisville, Kentucky, which has had a female pastor since 1993. The vote to uphold those removals came just a few hours before a 2/3 majority of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, separately voted to approve an amendment to its constitution that would more broadly prohibit churches from having women hold any pastoral title. The amendment must pass by a 2/3 vote 2 years in a row, with Wednesday's vote marking its first. The Baptist Press, which describes itself as the SBC's official news service, reported Saddleback was found not to be in friendly cooperation with the SBC's statement of faith, which says, in part, that the office of pastor is limited to men. Warren was among those who asked the SBC to reverse the February decision on Tuesday. He appealed to the representatives to, quote unquote, act like Southern Baptists who have historically agreed to disagree on dozens of doctrines in order to share a common mission, per the New York Times, which reported Warren appointed a husband and wife to succeed him after his retirement in 2021. 3 more women were ordained as pastors at Saddleback that year, according to Baptist Press. Voters were unconvinced. Per the Baptist Press, 9,437 votes were cast in favor of upholding the decision, compared to 1,212 against. Fern Creek Baptist appeal was similarly rejected, with 9,700 voting in favor of upholding the decision and 806 voting against it. Remember, that specific church has had a female pastor since 1993. So this overwhelming amount of folks really want to see them out of there. Linda Barnes Popham, the pastor of Fern Creek Baptist, told CNN this morning, Thursday, her church would continue to lift high the gospel of Jesus Christ, but the expulsion felt like a divorce. On the other hand, there's something liberating and freeing being bound no more to the traditions and opinions and the power of those in leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention. Still, the fallout will be felt for generations, Barnes Popham indicated, recalling how a 14-year-old girl sought her out in the crowd and wept in her arms, telling her, I'm 14 years old, and when I was 11, God called me to be a minister, and now I can't do that in the family that I love. She continues saying it's such a sad, sad thing for her. She's grown up in this denomination, and so have her parents, and her dreams to be a pastor in the denomination that she loved. In his own statement, Warren said the next generation won't care about arcane procedures and political infighting. So powerful, so important for us as Catholics. Let me break this down. Why? Because the conversation on this end is very similar. Many people, particularly women of the older generation, want to see female priests. They want to see female deaconesses. They want to see women taking on leadership roles in the church, and they don't seem to agree with why that is not possible for what we believe as Christians. And I think, ironically, these same women that bring this up never look at ways that women can actually be used in the faith. They never bring up ways, particularly when we talk about Catholicism, because when you talk about Protestants and stuff like that, their whole thing is completely different. But in our faith, we have the means for women to be substantial and be visible in the faith through our sisters and our nuns. In our next segment later on today, we're going to be talking about a 200-year-old institution that is closing, a 200-year-old religious order that is closing its doors because they don't have enough women coming in with interest to join their order. That should never be happening today, particularly when the voice is to say that women need more of a role. Now, why? Why don't women have this place? Well, it goes back to the Bible. In fact, if we look specifically at 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 to 12, this is a chapter where Paul talks about head covering and submission and the order of submission. And it's such a beautiful thing. And any one of us who veils, you should know and understand that scripture by heart, by rote, because that is where our veiling, the root of it, truly comes from. For me, as a woman that veils, I don't see this submission thing as something that's bad. To me, it's a beautiful thing. Because when I am a married woman, I am called to submit to my husband. But what does that mean? It does not mean subservience, because all throughout the Bible, we are taught that men and women, we are equal in our value. We are mutually submitted to each other, right? Paul talks about that in Ephesians, that women and men, husband and wife, are in submission to each other and both to God. But for me to even understand that before I'm married, I have to be in submission to someone. Who am I supposed to be in submission to? The Lord above. That is what head coverings mean for me, and what I encourage other women to understand. The next place where we see Paul go into the order and leadership when it comes to women is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 to 35, where he says that women must remain silent while in church. And there was a reason that this was said, and it's not in the way that people like to pose this, right? He was saying that women need to be silent in church, and that if they have questions, to go ahead and ask their husbands later on. Now, there's lots of theories as to why this was said. And it wasn't about women not having a place in the church. Keep in mind that in 1 Corinthians, back in that chapter 11, Paul talks about women being able to pray, worship, and prophesy in the temple, that they were allowed to do that, but they had to do it with their heads covered in submission to God and in submission to their husbands. Where does it say that women are not allowed a voice? They are not allowed to lead. It's also known that there was a lot of disorder going on in Corinth at that time, that the church was all over the place, their worship was all over the place, and they needed leadership. They needed organization. And as men in that culture, in that time, and even to this day, men have the leadership role and position. So men were put there and edified to lead as Christ leads the church. It's all connected. And in that way, we as women are the literal brides of the church, the brides of Christ, and eventually the brides of our husbands for those of us who end up being married. And even still, if you're not, you are still in submission to the Lord. So this whole thing about Paul going into women staying silent in church was silent during times where discussions were being had, where lessons were being taught. There's also some theories that women who were less educated, perhaps women who were less knowledgeable about scripture, were very vocal at that time. And they were trying to make sure that order remained within the congregation so that way the word could be heard. So in that respect, it comes back to the very, very clear message that we as women have a role. And to twist the Bible in a way to try to strong arm our presence in a way that's not ordered is a detriment. And I think that that's a big problem that we're seeing within our society as a whole today. Now, there is another thing that was said in this article, which was very concerning to me. And that is this passage or this thing where that was said about we have to agree to disagree. And that's a problematic approach when it comes to faith of any kind. The other thing that was also said to go into that was that the female pastor who was ousted had said that, our congregation is going to still worship the Lord, which is beautiful. But she said in a way that, she had this 14-year-old girl who was crying and didn't know her role in place. And I think that's a failure on the part of the women in the church. Do you mean to tell me that out of all the women in the church, in the congregation, the only thing that they have that's useful for leading other women and being examples for men of what virtuous women looks like is on the pulpit? This is where we get to take our power as women and to really stand in that and to create our presence that can be felt and that can be heard, that can be seen. As women, we are the connecting fiber when it comes to society, when it comes to everything. We are the builders of the community. That is a part of who we are. Why isn't that being utilized? And the final thing that really just boiled my blood was the statement that Warren made at the end of our article. And that was how he said that the next generation won't care about these arcane traditions and wanting to see more women in power in places of position in the church outside of what God has willed for us. And I think that, at least for us as Catholics, he is sorely mistaken. And anyone who believes that, you are sorely mistaken. Did you know that within the traditional Latin Mass, that the largest numbers of people, the congregation, is being made up of Generation Xers, of millennials are the largest group, and the Zs. These are all people of childbearing years. The Xers are getting a little bit up there though. But the millennials and the Zs, they're the ones having the kids. And as Catholics, you can't just stop at one, okay? You're going to have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11 kids, okay? So you got all a tribe of kids and you raising them in this Orthodox church, and the Vatican ain't none the happier. Okay, that is why they're cutting down all of this stuff. Not only is it the radicalization of the people on the far end of it who take this stuff and use it and weaponize it within the faith, but it's this overwhelming growth of young people who are demanding tradition, who are demanding order, who are demanding orthodoxy. And they're trying to shy away from that in many respects to meet the demands of the world. But it's the younger generation that want this. So when they talk about this arcane thing, I don't think it's really there. Not in the ways that they think. Not in the ways that people who are looking for faith and tradition want and demand. We also see this in secular society. There are reports coming out now that women and men, young men, first of all, young men have taken themselves outside of the dating world. Okay, they're not even dating, having relationships or anything like that. Women in today's culture are having less casual hookups. And a lot of it has to do because of their change in lifestyle and not drinking alcohol and really standing firm in their femininity and owning that. And so there's also a chaste movement going on, chastity movement going on, pushing back against the hypersexuality and what we've got going on in this culture. And this is all being led by the younger generation. You guys, If this is our future, I think we're in good hands. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What is the role of women in the Catholic Church particularly? What can we do to really just bolster our presence and make it be seen and heard and known that women matter too, even without being in the position of leadership as priest? Go ahead and post your comments below. Hey, let me ask you this. Are you looking to sell your home or are you looking to buy a new one? Well, let me tell you, you've got to check out our friends over at Real Estate for Life because, honey, they will get you connected with a faith-based real estate agent who can help you to find the perfect community for you and your family. Listen, we got to stick together when it comes to faith and building up our community. I know how important it is for you to be in a community of other Catholics with a strong sense of faith, strong sense of value, where your children and you can feel safe. You can fellowship with other people who hold your same values. Listen, you've got to run. Do not walk. Run right away to their website, realestateforlife.org, and then tell them that Roxy sent you and get your dream home by the grace of God today. Let's get into the question of the day. Our question of the day comes from Reddit about gender roles and a question that this poster had about the homily given by a priest. Now, this was from a few years ago, but I think it fits so beautifully in our conversation today. So let's go ahead and get into the question. Last Sunday, the reading was a fragment of The Wife of Noble Character from Proverbs. For those of you that are not aware, that's Proverbs 31, followed by a homily that left me a bit baffled. I don't intend to complain about the priest because I'm sure he said everything in good faith without any malice, but I do have a problem with some things he said, and I hope someone could offer me an explanation so that I could understand. Throughout the homily, the priest very strongly emphasized that it's a woman's duty to serve her husband and take care of all his needs. He said that women are the emotional ones and therefore they are supposed to raise the children, and men are unable to take care of their children that well because they are the intelligent ones. Generally, he only talked about women in the context of marriage, children, and taking care of the household. He didn't say that women were worse than men, of course, but he unintentionally implied that women were inferior to men. At least this is the impression I got. I wouldn't even mind being a stay-at-home mom, but I think that it as a sole purpose of my existence is a bit degrading. I see marriage as a partnership based on love. And when a wife takes care of her husband, it's because she loves him, not because it's her duty. And if the husband loves his wife, he'll too take care of her and the children. I know single fathers who raise children on their own and are doing a great job, and it would be hurtful to them to say that they are not good at it because they are not women. I'm posting this question on Reddit because whenever I ask someone for explanation, they either said, if the priest said so, then it must be true. Stop thinking about this. Or this couldn't have been what the priest really meant or said. You must have misunderstood everything. Which would be fine if they explained what the priest meant according to them, but they just said I was wrong and that was it. So I'm hoping that by posting here that I get an answer. This is a hot button topic, and that's why I wanted to pick it for our second segment in the podcast, because so many women, I think, in today's culture get this wrong. And let's be honest here, there are some men who get this wrong too. Our culture today, to me, is so disturbing because there is this obsession right now with this talk about submission and men demanding women to submit to them, right? And while I understand this and I agree, the thing is that women are not supposed to be submitting to every man on the planet. Honey, the Bible says to submit to your husband. And that's a whole thing to unpack here, okay, that we're not going to do necessarily on this talk. We'll do this on another talk. But the Bible clearly says about submission to one's husband and that a man's role is to provide for his family, right? And the two working together in these distinct roles is what builds a strong family, a strong community, a strong nation, a strong world rooted in faith. The problem with today's conversation, it's kind of like we had talked about this in the whole Lila Rose conversation with when she was on the Whatever podcast. Go ahead and make sure you listen to that one next after this. But the problem with this conversation is when you take God out of the picture, you don't have that full understanding of what submission means and what the role of men and women are. And I think that because we are not raised as women, particularly in the culture today, to look at ourselves as being homemakers or caretakers or being wives or being mothers, we're being taught to put things off till years and years later. Next thing you look up, you blink, and you're running out of time. That's what society promotes. It does not promote us being domestic figures or being traditional in that sense with traditional gender ideology. But the church does. Now, here's the thing. When today's women hears this, when we hear the context of this within the faith, their heads start to explode. It's like, I don't want to do that. I am not submitting. I'm not being domestic. Just like this woman kind of is pushing back against the rhetoric, because society has told us that this is abusive, that we have no voice, that we are only important if we have education and degrees and high-powered jobs, that nothing else matters. That is what we're taught, but that's not what God necessarily has intended for us. To understand and unpack this, you have to understand and know Ephesians chapter 5, verses 5 to 25. It is there. It lays it out so beautifully. The role of men and women in marriage. The main purpose is not just to love each other, but it's to get each other to heaven. And if you lead in your relationship like that, it all starts to make sense, because you want to get each other to heaven. You want to get your children to heaven. So it's your role as a woman, and our bodies, our nature, our just everything about us has that nurturing quality. And it's useful. And as a woman, to ignore that, I think it's a denigration of faith and the way that God made us. Now, here's the reality. Not every woman's going to be a mother. Not every woman's going to be a wife. Some of us are staring down the barrel of being single for the rest of our lives. If that is God's will, no matter how painful that might be, that's going to be a reality for so many people, because marriage rates are on the decline across the world. So what do? There are other ways to serve, to put yourself forth, to be of usefulness to other people. Usefulness in a good sense, usefulness in using your feminine qualities that the Lord has given you to nurture your community, to nurture your family, to nurture the people around you, to nurture the things that you care about. So putting that into perspective, it's still being done according to His will. So when you take away the fact that mothering isn't just about children, it kind of makes you see how even in this world today, as she's in waiting as a single woman, how can you foster that and make it feel more in balance with your life? The other thing we have to remember is that there's another side of the coin to this, which is the men. Any man who you both choose to marry, right? Each other, it has to be mutual agreement here. He should be a man of God that understands what this means in full context, that he should be a man, get this, at the same time that you are dedicating your life to your legacy together with your children that you have together, with the home and everything that encompasses that. You know what he's required to do? To lay down his life. He is required to die for you, to die for your children, to die to his ego, to serve his family, and to serve the Lord fully. So it's really not that imbalanced, because you are laying down your womb, you are laying down your trust, you are laying down your vulnerability and everything to serve the purpose that you both have, which is to get to heaven together. So it's deeper than this thing. Like, we reduce it to housework. We reduce it to raising children. We reduce it to this thing that's so much greater than the conversation we're having. And at the same time that you're laying all that down, and for some women, if you choose, or if your circumstances financially may have you staying at home, because that's great, but some of you might have to go to work. You still have to uphold your duties as women. But for men too, the same thing applies. The same thing applies. Laying down your life, you're both laying down your life to each other with the purpose of getting higher. I really implore women today to get into Ephesians, not just women, excuse me, because I talk to women. I'm a woman. I talk to other women. That's, natural. But the men too. You need to break down Ephesians, because the other thing that's never talked about in the submission thing is the mutual submission. That submission isn't just this like one-way street. Submission is about mutually submitting to each other as you submit to the Lord. It's deep. It is really deep, and it's a beautiful thing. It does not have to be something that makes you feel less than as a woman. And even if you're a woman who has to work outside of the home, it doesn't make you less of a woman if that's what your economic circumstances require. That's where looking at how you can possibly, in today's world, how can you split the housework to make it a little bit easier if you're both out there working? How can you make life easier for you so you can take care of the children and do what you have to do? Yes, take care of your husband's needs as much as he's taking care of your needs as well. There's got to be communication. Love is not a reason to marry someone. Sometimes we love people who are horrible for us, that we should not be in sacramental marriages with. People love the wrong person. People let emotion lead them and not faith, not discernment. So love is a dangerous thing to base marriage on alone. Of course, you want to love your spouse or your future spouse, right? But looking at things from a perspective of, can the two of us get each other to heaven? Do we worship the same God? Do we believe the same things? Do we have the same values and foundation? That is what that homily was probably about, and what you should take home from that conversation. What are your thoughts? Go ahead and post them below. Let's go ahead and get into the next segment. Are you enjoying today's conversation? Go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now and hit that thumbs up button. Plus, make sure that you add your comments down below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts about what we're talking about today, because we got some good stuff, okay? And I gotta hear your thoughts. Support the ministry and support this channel by joining as a member. Unlock special emojis you can use in chat and in the comments. Get a special badge so everyone knows that you are a part of the Vatican Plans community. Unlock private members-only videos and also our members-only podcast for scriptural rosaries, Lectio Divina, and more. As a New Yorker, this next story had me absolutely floored. Just state of shock, okay? Because here's the thing. If you ever went to Catholic school in the New York area, you were probably taught by the Sisters of Charity. Everyone knew the Sisters of Charity. I know I've been taught by the Sisters of Charity in elementary school and in high school as well. So to hear that this 200-year-old religious order is closing its doors forever, I'm sorry, that's something that it's just alarming. So I want to go ahead and talk about this, because the truth of the matter is that the religious life in the United States and just across the world when it comes to Catholicism is having a slow death. But not everywhere. The religious orders are actually doing quite well in the more traditional rites. We saw the story of Sister Wilhelmina that you've got to check out. Absolutely beautiful story of a nun who started a Benedictine order in Missouri. She recently died, but her order was a traditional Orthodox within the Latin Mass and all that stuff. And it's so beautiful to see and to witness, and to show that a woman who was so steadfast in her faith, who left her Oblate sisters, she left that order because of the fact that she was mortified, basically, of all the changes that were happening in the church at the time. And her order of sisters in this Benedictine order, they wore full habits. They did their masses and daily office and all that stuff. All that stuff is in Latin. We saw that ourselves. So it begs to wonder what the heck happened. So I want to talk about that. We've got a video that I recently came across on the Associated Press's website that we got to talk about what's going on with the Sisters of Charity and out of their own mouths what they think might have happened. Let's go ahead and get into the story.
Well, the Sisters of Charity came to New York in 1847 from Elizabeth Seton. And we came to meet the needs of people in New York at that time. And for the last 200 years, 203 or 4 years, we have been serving the people of New York. We realized that we're diminishing in numbers. At the same time, we had a report about our entrances. And in the United States anyway, and we have not had anybody in 21 years. And so as we were sitting around in this very room at that table, we said, we really need to name this reality. And I think we did it in our heads at that point. We said, yes, we should have a session where we say we ask the assembly to approve a recommendation from us that we wouldn't take anybody else anymore in the United States. So once we were going to make that statement, we said, well, there were 154 of us at that point. This is who we are, and this is who we're going to be, minus the people that die over the next couple of years. So we really are on a path to completion.
One of the things that you'd go through when something like this is looming, you think, what did we do wrong? And so I'm sure there were many times when we questioned all those changes that we made back in the 70s, the habit, leaving schools, going into other various ministries, and was there something wrong in that? But when you stop and think, you recognize that each person who did any of those things was doing it in faith, right. trying to read the signs of the time, and do what they're called to do, and that can't be wrong. We're looking not only to pass on and make sure that the people who are following us really understand the call of charity and the gift that it is in their lives and in the church, but also the relationships that we have with each other. Charity, well, the old adage, charity begins at home. Well, if it's not among us, it's not real.
And there you have it from the sisters' own mouths. They asked some really great questions about what happened and what's happening in the faith, what's happening with religious orders. We spent the beginning portion of this conversation today talking about women and our place in the church, and seeing that example with the Southern Baptist congregation and how they are making a stand to say that women have a place, but it's not on the pulpit. It's not in the leadership positions such as pastor. And at the same time, here in Catholicism, we have a pathway for women to be able to serve in the best ways possible, to be examples in the community. And here we have a religious order that was founded 200 years ago by Elizabeth Ann Seton, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, and it's closing. They hadn't gotten any new entries in 21 years. How could anyone be okay with that? How can we sit here and say that there's no room for us when we've got a religious order coming to completion in the way that it has, a significant one? The sister who was talking also pointed out something very interesting where she talked about the changes made during the 1970s and everything. Well, it just always seems that everything goes back to that period. Everything, not only in the church, but in society as a whole. How things with the sexual revolution and all of the other movements that were going on, how it really impacted society in a way that no one saw. I think, and I give some grace. I give some grace in believing that women of that time thought that they were doing something great for our generation to be able to stand up as women, to say that we matter, our rights matter, that we have a place and a voice that should be seen and heard in the world as well. But there was something that went awry, even in secular culture and society, where we now have this fighting and this imbalance of everything from relationships to just the education. More women are graduating with college degrees than men. Women are having higher paying positions within companies than men in these days. We're outpacing the men. Now, this could be a call to action for men to say to stand up, stand back and take up your mantle and stand up for your masculinity, but we have to do it as a whole. But as we can see with these sisters, even they were questioning whether or not these things had an impact, showing up in the community with your habit on, so everyone knew that you were a representation of God. Now, if you see a sister on the street, you wouldn't even know if she was anybody's grandmother or somebody's auntie or whatever. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know because the distinction isn't there. And that distinction, I feel, matters. It really does. The other thing that I really was bothered by was the fact that as this particular sister was talking about this, she kind of like pushed it away. It's like, it's that thing that shall not be mentioned, that thing that we can't quite talk about, the reality of what happened and what is happening in our church. We can't really say that, oops, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we need to go back to looking at things and doing it differently. She backpedaled on that. And I thought that, you know what, that's a cop-out. So right now, let's talk about it. What are your thoughts on this? Now, here's the thing. I don't like to demonize, let's not get into the liturgy wars and all that other stuff, even though it's hard to, but is there a place where traditionalism is really important, as we saw with Sister Wilhelmina and her beautiful Benedictine order that is just thriving? Why are more women who actually want to get into being sisters in religious orders and nuns, who want to really fully commit themselves to the life with Christ as the lead? Why is it thriving in that community and not in these orders that have been around for several centuries? 21 years, no one's inquiring. That's more than a cultural shift. There's something deeper going on. What is it? What are your thoughts? Post that below. I think that, I don't know, as a woman, I feel like I have such a passion, of sharing my faith and just getting out there and talking about these important conversations. The world wants us to believe that our faith is dying. The world wants us to believe that God doesn't exist. The world wants us to question everything that God has aligned and has for us. The world wants us to question, because when you are detached from God, when you don't believe in anything, you know what you are? You're easier to control. You are. Because all of the things that the world promised us as women, freedom, sexual freedom, and all of this and we're seeing years later that the experiment is kind of failing. We were supposed to be the ones that benefited from all this stuff. But what society and studies are showing us more and more is that people are pulling away from the culture, that the culture itself is dying. For all the things that we say that we stand for, things are falling apart politically, socially, spiritually, and that's not good for humanity on the whole. And when we can see this manifested in the church, something has to be done, something has to be said, something has to be brought up with fire within our younger generation, who is standing up and asking for tradition, asking to be seen and heard in their faith and not be ostracized. How can we evangelize and mobilize them to go into these orders, to live the life of Christ that they may be called to do? This is going to be an ongoing conversation here, because there's no way we're going to be able to get any of this done in one podcast. But I hope that this message does inspire you. And we talked about a couple of other things here in today's podcast that I do want you to check out. So I want you to go ahead and watch this video about Sister Wilhelmina, which goes a little bit more into why her presence is so important in the church. And you can also take a look at the other video that I mentioned here, where I talked about Lila Rose and how she just completely decimated Justin Waller on the Whatever podcast and his red pill talking points. These are the conversations that we need to be having as Catholics. So go ahead and check these out if you haven't already. Post your comments below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.